I watch him sifting through the records, repeating to himself that we must figure a way to have her tested, or she will continue spreading the fever, and someone else will die. Maybe even that girl in the hospital. He pinches the bridge of his nose and says we must stop her. Short of kidnapping, I don't know how he will get to her. But we must figure out a way. Mr. Soper tried patiently to explain the problem to her, but she responded so very badly. Why won't she cooperate with us? Does she honestly not believe Mr. Soper, despite the evidence that the disease follows her? He says he can see in her eyes that she fears for her job, and that is the only thing that makes sense to me. December 14th, 1906. In pondering Mary Mallon's response, I think that Mr. Soper's accusation in front of her employer must have given her a great surprise and embarrassment. But I don't think we were wrong. We simply asked her for a test of her fluids, and beginning to see that people in the sciences often have to think in a different realm, somewhere beyond human emotions. They must hold their feelings in a dark cave deep inside themselves and never release them. They can't be afraid of embarrassment, neither in themselves nor others. Yet I think it must be tremendously difficult to accept that you have a thing living in you, a disease that you can't see or taste or touch. One that doesn't make you ill. Perhaps it's too frightening for her to contemplate. It's not like lice where you just pluck off your skin, or a rash you can heal with cream. It's never been proven. But this cook, if she has any sense, must suspect that Mr. Soper's accusation is right. However, as far as we know, she has not left her place of work, so perhaps she thinks that his theory is completely poppycock. The cook's reaction has given Mr. Soper pause. She is a rarity, a new discovery, really, very possible living proof of Dr. Koch's theory, the first of her kind, and Mr. Soper does not want to frighten her off. He also doesn't want her to continue working and possibly spreading the disease, so we have a special situation on our hands. I believe Mr. Soper is contemplating bringing in our superintendent, Mr. Briggs, but I don't think he is ready for that step yet. Mr. Soper says we must prove to her the danger she carries, and then this epidemic will stop. He says we must approach the cook as if she were a rabid animal. We must corner her with care and tact, draw her in for testing. Mr. Soper is thinking of trailing her to her home, where we can talk with her in some measure of privacy. We can't approach her at the mansion again, and we don't want to alert her bureau by inquiring about her further. I'm not sure how I feel about trailing her, after her. Are we really to follow her like spies? I don't remember reading any examples of this kind of detective work in my chief's records. But I must rely on Mr. Soper as my guide. He knows what is best. December 16th, 1906. This case is so important to me. I hate to leave in the middle, but I'm simply aching to see my dearest friend and talk to her. We've been planning this trip for nearly a year, and I decided I'll go mad if I don't see my Anushka soon. So I booked the ticket to Virginia from the 24th to the 27th with the Southern Line. 4 days was all the holiday Mr. Briggs would give, and he did not do so willingly. I paid for the ticket with my own funds, which made me feel a bona fide member of the adult world. When I imagine myself alone on a huge locomotive all the way to Virginia, I feel small and scared as a young child. When I think of traveling out of New York for the first time in my whole life, I feel big and as a grown woman. Will Anushka be happy to see me after all this time? What gifts can I take along that will remind her of our crowded city life and what she left behind? Perhaps I could bring a bottle of backfire from the motor carriages, a song from the hurdy-gurdy player, or I could gather up the neighbors and pay Mr. Barnacle $2 for a photograph of all of us in front of her old tenement building. I can see Anushka looking at it, pointing out Mrs. Zandberger and the Moskowitz boys, and both of us bursting into those great gales of wonderful, loud laughter that I can feel all the way down to my toes. I was, for a time, worried about leaving Marm as I have never done so before, and she has had enough loved ones leave her. But her first outing with her new friend Mr. Silver went so well. I think maybe she'll survive without me. Mr. Silver took her to the Metropolitan Museum, and Marv arrived home full of stories and a smile that wouldn't leave her eyes. It seems Mr. Silver has frequented the museum with paper and pencil, and spends time copying the pictures and figures, and knows the history of the masterpieces, and the Greek and Italian artifacts, and told Marm all about them. I'd be curious to see how good those drawings really are. When I return from my trip, the three of us will attend the New Year's celebration over at the factory near Herald Square, where Mr. Silver is a cutter, and Uncle David tailors. They will be frying fish in barrels of oil on the street, and setting off firecrackers, and dancing to an oompa band. This party will give me a chance to become better acquainted with Mr. Silver. It will give me the opportunity to thank him for his kindness to my lonely Marm, and to remind him of my father's existence, which he, like us, must never forget for a moment. December 20th, 1906. I had a strange and illuminating conversation with my chief while waiting in the freezing weather outside of the Fifth Avenue home where Mary Mallon works. It was our second attempt at trailing her, but she had not come out of the mansion, and I felt somehow it was below Mr. Soper's dignity to stand out in the cold for naught. So I said, "It's rather brisk for such a task, don't you think, sir?" His gaze on the house was quite intense, as if he could make her appear with his eyes. "I've been through far, far worse," he said. "I imagine you have," I said. "You lived through a war." A nervous pinch started in my stomach. I wasn't sure why I had brought up the war. Maybe the cold had numbed my fear, or maybe I thought, there in the dark, that it might be a good time to dare a question about my father. "The war, yes," he said. "We spent long days trying to find out who made those men so ill." "Did you know any of the soldiers personally?" I asked. I was hoping he might connect my father's name with mine and miraculously recall the short, curly-haired, olive-skinned man who belonged to me. "It was not a time of socializing," Mr. Soper said. He blew his breath onto his hands to keep warm. "I was too busy with research and observation to really get to know the men," he said. A stab of disappointment let the air from me. We stood in silence, our eyes on the mansion. "It's interesting when you think of war, how bacteria can also be used as a weapon," Mr. Soper said suddenly. "What do you mean?" I asked. "Well, for instance, during the Civil War, men from the South would send men from the North blankets." "A gesture of truce?" I said, not understanding. "Quite the opposite," he said. "The blankets had been wrapped around men who died of smallpox. They would spread the deadly disease to their enemies through the blankets." This story shook me. It made me angry to think of disease and bacteria and how dangerous those tiny organisms were to us. "Mr. Soper," I said, "I think I would understand this case much better if I could actually see what the typhoid bacteria looks like." I watched, even in the darkness, the muscles twitching in his jaw. I dared to add, "Through the microscope, I mean." "Perhaps," he said, "perhaps it would be a good idea for you to see them. Then you'd understand better how they pass from person to person." A rush of blood flowed through me. He agreed to allow me to look in the microscope. "First thing tomorrow morning, I will see. I will put my eye to that bronze lens and see what this world is made of." I shiver with anticipation, with the promise of our undertaking. I can hardly sleep, imagining what it might be like to look at real bacteria. The things I will understand, the doors that will open to me. Oh, I cannot wait. December 21st, 1906. Bright and early this morning we went into the laboratory, not before the science fellows arrived. I could feel very cool male eye on me. Mr. Soper took a typhoid sample from the icebox and swabbed it on a slide and slipped it into a free scope. Once I looked into the microscope, my idea about cells and bacteria transformed. In my mind, they'd always been as inert as drawings. Here, they were alive, like tiny worms, dozens of them. Before me, these restless creatures wriggled their way around the slide. They were nearly see-through, as if they were made of water. They danced and moved just like a crowd in the street, gathering and separating in their own way. Like little noodles one might swallow so easily, without knowing. I felt as if I were seeing the river's floor, or another country. Places earlier off limits to me. It astonished and dismayed me that those minuscule bacteria had the force to kill a person. My eye to the microscope made me want to see more, to see deeper into the world. I want to see a nerve cell, a sample of blood, a leaf of a plant, my fingernail, a piece of hair. I want to take the instrument home and slide the world under my lens, to examine it in a way I never have before. December 23rd, 1906. In thinking over the typhoid bacteria I saw in the microscope, I think perhaps our cook is made of something that isn't quite human, that doesn't respond to these tiny, sickening cells. It's almost as sinister as Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, this idea. Maybe that's why our cook doesn't want to come in for testing. She doesn't get sick and won't admit that she makes other people sick. She can't see what we're all talking about. I wish we could bring the microscope to her and show her what the typhoid looks like. I wish we didn't have to stake her out like a criminal, or corner her like an animal. It doesn't feel quite right to approach her in this way. I must trust that Mr. Soper knows what he is doing by trailing her. We still have not seen her come out of the mansion. I think it'll be a relief to have a few days away from this case. We've been working with such focus. I simply cannot see clearly. Just 3 more days and I'll be on my way to Anushka. I'm nervous about the trip, but I'm glad to go. I can't wait to see my best friend's smiling face. I fear Mr. Soper will be spending the holiday alone. He speaks only of work, of Mary Mallon, and how to get her to submit to testing. When I asked him about his plans for Christmas, he shrugged my question away. From the notes, I can see he's been working late and on Sundays, trying to figure out if his theory is wrong in any way, if there is something we missed, some other way these families could have fallen ill. I believe he does not wish to encounter the woman's kitchen knife again if he doesn't have to. I think the incident embarrassed him as well as Mary, and we need to contact her more successfully next time. There is so much to think over, so many things I don't know. I see Mr. Soper working on this case in my absence. What will he do if he has to face that cook alone? While I hope he does find her residence, I pray that no harm comes to him while I am gone. December 28th, 1906. I hardly know where to begin writing my impression of Anushka's farm and the trip. It was such a whirlwind. I have not yet caught my breath and recollected my thoughts into any sort of coherent line. I did not realize how far Virginia was, nor the many different lands I'd be passing through. I arrived home yesterday, this morning actually, after nearly 10 hours in that bumpy, rocking locomotive, and still I feel the ground moving beneath me. Tired as I am, I have to write, even a quick entry. There is so much I must record. To a large degree, the trip was nothing like what I expected. The amount of acreage her father owns, how striking that he was able to save enough money from the bookshop to buy such a piece of land. I keep thinking of the grandness of the farm, the distance I could see, endless ground covered in a white shawl of snow. I felt my eyes stretching, looking for miles ahead of me to the horizon where earth meets sky. I've never looked so far in my life. The house struck me so. It looked raw, walls and floors of big planks whitewashed clean, the railwood furniture, knots and grains left intact, the row of butter churns, the cast iron range, big enough to feed the boys and all of their friends, and hers. Her parents busy, but with work that made them whistle, the warmth of the wood stove in the living room, the walk we took into the woods, the way we scared rabbits from their holes and partridges, no, peahens, she called them, and all of her beautiful animals, horses, lambs, chickens. I didn't realize the extent of her responsibilities, how much labor is involved in running a farm, and this not even planting season. Every moment is taken up, the feeding, cleaning, grooming, slaughtering, smoking, shoveling. I was awed by the muscles in her arms. I have never tasted lamb so fresh. Next to the herring I brought, the chops seemed to be practically walking. The potato pancakes her mother made, the onions her father jarred, the bread and honey. Goodness, I think I have gained 10 pounds in 3 days. On my second afternoon with her, when we had finished all her chores, I accompanied her, but was not obliged to work nearly as hard as her. Anushka took me to a nearby pond that had frozen over. She wouldn't say why. She still has that impish sense of mystery. When we got to the edge, suddenly she cried out, "Watch!" and ran out onto the ice. Right before my eyes, she flopped onto her bottom and slid across the entire expanse of the pond, petticoats flying, bloomers exposed to the birds. A shock of cold air caught in my throat, then I exploded into a great burst of laughter, and I couldn't help it. She looked so very silly and daring at the same time. She ran over the ice back to me, her curls bouncing, her breath coming into heavy white puffs, and she dragged me out onto the pond with her. There was nobody else for miles around. We slipped and fell and skittered all around the frozen water until the day darkened. I have not laughed so much for nearly a year. It felt as if we had not skipped a single day in our togetherness, but rather picked up right where we had left each other. But time is changing us, pulling us deeper into life without having each other to turn to. I felt like she needed me, but I couldn't pinpoint how or why. It was on the last day, when I met her friend Ida and Randall and saw Anushka's relation to them, that I understood how she holds her darker feelings inside now, how she guards them from me, almost. In her letters, and before we met them, Anushka didn't tell me of her friends' advanced ages. Ida is 27, Randall a man of 30, which is nearly Mr. Soper's age. It was clear how she could love both these people. Our conversation with them ranged far and wide. They were both so full of knowledge about the natural world, and the way they named trees and celestial bodies, Randall's reading of clouds, Ida's firm way with the animals. They were both so easy with themselves and each other. Randall's power and skill, his long, sensitive face and thick blonde hair, are very alluring. I understand how Anushka could have a terrible mash on him. Ida's quick smile and the deep way she listens when one speaks has great charm as well. Their backgrounds are so different, Randall from wealthy Protestant stock, Ida a second-generation transplant from Lutheran Germany, and Anushka the New York Russian Jew. But it was a sweet camaraderie. Yet here is a difficulty. Those two friends of hers are in love with each other. It's clear how impossible it's been for Anushka to state her feelings, to choose, as I'd been urging her. Randall is kind to her, Ida's too wonderful to lose. But they have chosen each other, the pain Anushka must feel, my poor friend, the tear of the heart. I do hope Anushka finds another beau, someone who can see how very darling she is.